When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. It wasn't strength. It was the kind of smile you wear when you've run out of ways to hold yourself together. I remember the sunlight that day. It spilled across the kitchen tiles like honey. The scent of boiled tea leaves filled the air, and the clock on the wall ticked loud enough to feel like judgment. She stood by the counter, her fingers pressed around a mug, her eyes not quite meeting mine. Mom, she said softly, maybe it's time you live somewhere else. You need rest, and so do we. Those words hit the floor between us like a dropped plate. No shouting. No anger, just a quiet truth she had practiced in her head many nights before. I wanted to ask, peace from what? From me? But the words didn't come. So I nodded, because that's what mothers do. We make peace, even when peace means walking away. That night, I didn't sleep. The house hummed with small noises, the fridge, the ceiling fan, the faint ladder from the TV in the next room. Everything that used to sound comforting now sounded like distance. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan spin slow circles. I thought about my husband, how he used to snore lightly beside me, how he'd always reach for my hand halfway through the night. 7 years had passed since he was gone, yet sometimes I still turned my head expecting him to be there. When he died, my son brought me here. He said, "Mom, you'll never be alone again. This is your home now." I believed him. I believed that love could fill every empty corner, and for a while it did. In the early days, our house was always full of sound. Morning chatter, clinking plates, cartoons on TV. I'd make pancakes for my grandson, toast for my son, tea for my daughter-in-law. She'd laugh and say, "Mom, you're spoiling us." Those were sweet days, simple, ordinary, precious. We'd sit together at breakfast. She'd talk about work. He'd tease her. The boy would spill syrup everywhere. I'd clean the mess with a smile because that's what joy looked like to me. But slowly things changed. Not all at once, just small, almost invisible things. She started saying, "Mom, you don't have to do this every morning." Her voice was kind, but there was a tired edge to it. At first, I thought she wanted to give me rest. Later, I realized she wanted space, so I stopped waking early. I'd lie in bed until the clatter of dishes faded, then come out quietly and sit with my tea. The kitchen didn't smell like my cooking anymore. It smelled like silence. Sometimes she'd rush past me, late for work, perfume trailing behind her. "Bye, Mom," she'd say quickly. "Bye, dear," I'd reply, but by the time the words left my mouth, the door had already closed. My son would leave soon after, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder, half a piece of toast in his hand. "Take care, Mom," he'd say, and I'd wave. Then the house would fall still again, just me and the ticking clock. I found new routines. Watering plants on the balcony, folding laundry twice a day, watching old shows that didn't require thinking. I tried calling old friends, but most were busy or too far or too tired to talk. So I spoke to my husband instead, his photo in the frame by the window. "You'd know what to say," I whispered sometimes. "You always did." One Sunday, I cooked dinner, soup, roasted chicken, soft bread. When they came home, she looked surprised. "Mom, you didn't have to make all this," she said. "I wanted to." I smiled, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's just I was planning to order takeout tonight. You shouldn't tire yourself." Her words weren't cruel, but they carried a wall I couldn't climb anymore. That evening, I noticed how they sat closer to each other on the couch, their conversation soft, private. I sat in the armchair across the room, pretending to focus on the TV, pretending I belonged in that picture. My grandson still came to me sometimes. He'd bring his crayons, sit by my legs and draw suns and stick people. I'd smile, stroke his hair, and tell him stories about his grandpa, stories that always ended with laughter and a lesson. Those were the moments that kept me going, but even those began to fade. He grew older, busier, more attached to screens and stories. Children move on quickly. It's the grown-ups who stay behind. One night my son came to my room. He sat on the edge of my bed, looked tired, unsure. "Mom," he said, "please don't take things personally. She's just stressed. Work's been hard." I nodded, smiling the same practiced smile. "It's all right, Beta. I understand." He kissed my forehead and left. But after he closed the door, I cried quietly into my pillow. Because even though I understood, it still hurt. Understanding doesn't stop the ache, it only gives it shape. Weeks turned into months. I started staying in my room more, reading old letters, watching the street from the window. Sometimes neighbors passed by and waved, sometimes no one did. I'd make a small cup of tea and think about the years when life was louder, messier, warmer. I remembered the sound of my son's laughter when he was a boy, the way he used to run into my arms after school. Now that laughter belonged to someone else's world. And I couldn't blame him. That's what love does. It shifts, it grows, it builds new homes. But in building his, mine was left behind. Then came the day, the quiet Sunday I can't forget. The sky was pale and calm. I was dusting the shelf when she knocked softly and said, "Mom, can we talk?" She didn't look angry. She looked sad, maybe even guilty. "I feel things are tense," she began. "It's affecting everyone. Maybe it would be better if you stayed with your sister for a while." I don't have a sister, she knew that. But she couldn't bring herself to say leave. I just stood there, the duster still in my hand, heart pounding so hard it made my fingers tremble. And yet I smiled, because what else could I do? "If that's what you think is best," I said softly. Her eyes filled for a second, but she blinked it away. "Thank you for understanding, Mom." I nodded again, and she left the room. When the door closed, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around the curtains I had sewn myself. The quilt my husband and I bought the first winter we spent together. The photo frames, the small vase my grandson painted in kindergarten, every corner whispered memories. But that day, they all sounded like goodbyes. I didn't pack immediately. I just sat there until evening light turned orange, until the shadows stretched long across the floor. Then, for the first time in years, I opened my old brown suitcase. The leather creaked as if it remembered too, and as I folded my shawl, I whispered, "So this is what letting go feels like." After that day, everything felt quieter. Even the air inside the house seemed different. I tried to act normal, but something invisible had changed between us. Every step I took felt careful. Every word felt measured. It was as if the walls could hear the distance growing between me and the people I once called my own. My daughter-in-law stopped talking to me about small things. No more casual questions about dinner, no warm, "How was your day?" Now it was just short greetings and polite smiles. She was never rude, just distant. The way a person behaves when they no longer know how to be close. I noticed small things first. When I walked into the living room, she'd suddenly remember something she had to do in the kitchen. When I tried to help with dinner, she'd gently move my hand away and say, "It's okay, Mom, I'll handle it." I wanted to believe she was being kind, that she didn't want me to tire myself. But a mother knows when kindness is only an excuse. So I began staying in my room more often. I told myself it was to give her space. But deep down, I knew I was slowly disappearing from their world. One evening, I was sitting by the window when I heard them talking in the next room. I didn't mean to listen, but their voices carried through the thin walls. "She's not happy here," my daughter-in-law said quietly. "She looks lonely, and it's affecting all of us. Maybe it would be better if she had her own space." My son replied softly, "You mean you want her to move out?" "I'm not saying that," she said quickly. "I just think she'd be happier if she had her own place, somewhere peaceful." There was a pause. Then my son said, "I don't know how to tell her that." She didn't reply for a while, and then I heard her sigh, "You'll find the right time." I sat there, staring at the dark street outside. The sound of their voices faded, but the words stayed. My heart ached, but not out of anger. It was the ache of understanding, the kind that comes when love starts to change its shape. That night, I couldn't eat dinner. I told them I wasn't hungry. They didn't insist. I heard them eating together in the next room, their voices low and calm. My grandson's laughter echoed for a few seconds, and then there was silence again. I sat in my chair, holding my cup of tea, though it had gone cold. I tried to remember the sound of my husband's voice, the way he would tell me, "You're the heart of this house." And now, even that memory felt like it belonged to another time. A few days later, my daughter-in-law came to my room with a careful smile. "Mom," she said, "I talked to a friend. She knows of a nice place for older women. It's very peaceful. I think you'd really like it there." I looked at her. Her tone was soft, but her eyes were firm. I could see that this wasn't a suggestion. It was a decision already made. I wanted to ask her why she didn't just say what she truly felt, why she couldn't simply tell me, "I need my own space." But I didn't ask, because I already knew the answer. She wasn't cruel, she's just tired of adjusting, tired of feeling like a guest in her own home. And maybe in her heart, she believed I'd be happier somewhere else. So I smiled the way I had learned to smile through pain. "That's very thoughtful of you," I said quietly. "Thank you, dear." Her face relaxed, as if a heavy weight had lifted from her shoulders. And that moment, seeing her relief, I understood she had been waiting for my permission to let go. Later that evening, my son came to my room. He looked uncomfortable, like a child who'd broken something he couldn't fix. "Mom," he began about what Sarah mentioned earlier. I stopped him with a small nod. "It's all right, Beta. You don't have to explain. I understand." He blinked, surprised. "You do?" "Yes," I said. "You both just want what's best for everyone. I don't want to be the reason for any tension in your home." He sighed and held my hand. "Mom, you'll never be a burden." I smiled gently. Every parent says that once. And every child says it back. But life changes, doesn't it? He looked away, unable to answer. And in that silence, everything was already decided. That night, I sat on my bed, staring at my old suitcase. It had been tucked under my bed for years, filled with little things. Old letters, a shawl, a few photographs. I pulled it out and opened it slowly. The smell of old paper filled the room. I began folding my clothes one by one. My hands trembled slightly as I placed my favorite sweater inside. The one my husband had once said made me look like sunshine on a cloudy day. While I was packing, my grandson came into the room. "Grandma," he asked, "are you going somewhere?" I smiled faintly. "Just for a while, sweetheart." He looked confused. "But why?" I didn't know how to answer, so I said, "Because sometimes grown-ups need a little break too." He frowned, thinking hard. "Will you come back?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, my love. I'll always come back." He smiled, hugged me tight, and ran back out. When he left, I sat down on the edge of my bed and finally let the tears come. They were quiet, but they felt endless. Each tear carried a memory, a piece of the life I had built, slipping away from me. Over the next few days, I noticed small changes everywhere. The house was cleaner, neater, quieter, almost like it was preparing itself to move on without me. They began rearranging things, making space where my things used to be. I realized how quickly someone's presence can be erased from a home. I found out my old tea set was gone. It was a delicate porcelain set with little blue flowers, a gift from my wedding day. When I asked about it, my daughter-in-law said, "Oh, Mom, it was Chip." So I gave it away. I nodded, pretending it didn't matter, but inside it felt like a small funeral for another memory. On my last night there, I didn't sleep. I walked around the house quietly, touching the furniture, the curtains, the family photos on the wall. Every corner whispered something, a laugh, a birthday, a morning conversation long forgotten. I whispered to myself, "Thank you for letting me love you." Even if it wasn't forever, I paused by my son's door, hearing the soft murmur of their voices inside. He sounded tired, and she sounded relieved. I closed my eyes and sent a silent prayer for them both, that their love would stay strong, that their hearts would find peace. Then I went back to my room and sat by the window. The moonlight fell across the floor, soft and quiet. I thought of my husband again. "You'd know what to say?" I murmured. "You'd know how to make this hurt a little less." The next morning, I left. My son carried my suitcase to the car. My grandson clung to my arm and asked again, "Grandma, you'll come back, right?" I kissed his forehead. "Always, my dear, always." My daughter-in-law hugged me briefly. Her arms were light, her voice steady. "Take care of yourself, Mom." I nodded and smiled. "You too, dear." My son stood by the car door, unsure what to say. He looked at me, guilt heavy in his eyes. I reached out, touched his cheek, and said softly, "Don't worry. A mother's love doesn't end just because she moves away." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "Call me when you reach, okay?" "I will," I said, and then I got into the car. As we drove away, I looked back at the house. It grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared behind the trees. It was no longer mine, but I didn't hate it. I only felt a quiet gratitude for the years it had given me. The road ahead was long. I watched the trees blur past, their branches heavy with green leaves. I thought about how trees let go of their leaves every year, not because they want to, but because they must. Maybe that's what life was teaching me. Sometimes letting go isn't weakness, it's the only way to survive the seasons. The new place was small, a single bedroom, a small kitchen, a window facing a park. It smelled of fresh paint and emptiness. I unpacked slowly, setting my few things around the room, my husband's photo, my prayer book, a vase with one artificial flower. When I was done, I sat on the bed and looked around. It didn't feel like home yet. It felt like waiting for the H to fade, waiting to stop expecting familiar footsteps, waiting to belong again. That night, I made myself tea in an old cup. I sat near the window, watching children play under the street lights, their laughter carried through the evening air. I smiled even through my tears because life was still happening, even if mine had changed. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the space between chapters, the part where you pause, breathe, and learn how to start again. The first few weeks in my new place felt like walking through fog. Days and nights blended together. I'd wake up early, make tea for one, and sit by the window, watching strangers pass by on the street below. Sometimes I'd wave to the old man who walked his dog every morning. He never waved back, but somehow it still felt like company. The walls were plain and quiet. At home, silence used to be filled with distant laughter, footsteps, and the clinking of plates. Here, silence was just silence. I tried turning on the TV, but the voices felt empty. So I started talking to myself softly, like I used to talk to my husband when he was still alive. I'd say things like, "Did you see the sky today? It's beautiful." Or, I finally found the sugar jar. It might sound strange, but in loneliness, even your own voice becomes a friend. One morning, I decided to visit the park nearby. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, and children were playing on the swings. I sat on a bench and watched them laugh, their faces full of sunlight. A woman around my age sat next to me. She smiled and said, "You're new here, aren't you, Wes?" I replied, "Just moved in a few weeks ago." She nodded knowingly. "Let me guess, your children thought you needed a quieter life." I was taken aback. "How did you know?" She smiled again, a sad kind of smile. "Because that's what they all say." Her name was Maria. She told me she had been living in the same building for 3 years. Her husband had passed away, and her 2 sons lived in different states. "They call every Sunday," she said, "but it's not the same as hearing their laughter in the house." For the first time in a long while, I felt understood. We talked for almost an hour about families, memories, food, and all the little things that made life feel alive. Once, before leaving, she said, "Come by my place tomorrow. I make coffee strong enough to wake the dead." I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in months. The next day I visited her. We sat in her small kitchen, the smell of coffee filling the room. She showed me her collection of postcards, places her children had visited but never taken her to. As she flipped through them, I thought about all the things I'd never done because I was always waiting for someone else's timing. That evening, when I returned to my apartment, I felt lighter. It was strange, just one conversation, but it had shaken something inside me awake. I realized I didn't need my old house to feel alive. I just needed connection, even if it was small, even if it was new. One morning, about a month later, I woke up to a missed call from my son. When I called back, his voice was quiet, careful. "Mom, how are you doing?" he asked. "I'm all right," I said. "I've made a friend. Her name's Maria. She makes terrible coffee." He chuckled softly. "That's good, Mom. I'm glad you're settling in." There was a pause. Then he said, "Miss you. The house feels empty without you." I didn't say it out loud, but I thought, now you know what I felt. Still, I didn't want him to feel guilty. So I replied, "Homes always feel empty when love is missing, but don't worry, it finds its way back." He didn't respond for a few seconds. Then he said quietly, "I'm sorry." Mom, I felt tears gather in my eyes. For what, Beta? For letting things get this far. For not speaking up sooner. His voice broke a little. "I should have protected you better." I took a deep breath. "No, my son," I said softly, "you did what you thought was right. I don't blame you. Life just changes. We all grow in different directions." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Can we come visit this weekend?" My heart skipped. Of course. I'd love that. The days leading up to their visit felt like preparing for a festival. I cleaned the apartment, rearranged the furniture, even bought a small rug for the living room. Maria helped me pick flowers for the table. "You look nervous," she teased. "I am," I admitted. It's been months since I saw them. When Saturday finally came, I stood by the window watching every car that passed. When they arrived, my grandson ran up the stairs first, shouting, "Grandma!" I knelt down, and he threw his arms around me. That one hug felt like sunlight breaking through a long winter. My son followed, carrying a bag of groceries. My daughter-in-law came behind him, holding a small bouquet of lilies. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. We brought lunch. I smiled. "Thank you, dear. Come in." The first few minutes were awkward. We all moved carefully, as if walking on glass. But then my grandson started showing me his school drawings, and the air softened. We laughed, shared food, and slowly the silence that used to divide us began to fade. While clearing the table later, my daughter-in-law said, "Mom, this place is nice, peaceful." "Yes," I said, smiling. "It's small, but it listens to me when I talk." She looked at me, puzzled. "Listens?" I nodded. "At home, I used to talk, but my words never seemed to land anywhere. Here, they stay in the air a little longer." She looked down, her eyes glistening. "I didn't mean for things to go that way. I was tired, I guess." "I know," I said quietly. "You were trying to build your own world. I understand now." She reached out and held my hand. "Still, I'm sorry," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the word sorry, and I felt her sincerity. I squeezed her hand gently. "You did what you thought was best for your family." I only wish I had said how I felt before the silence grew too big. As she nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You're still family, Mom, always." I smiled. But I didn't say anything, because sometimes silence speaks the truth better than words ever could. That evening, after they left, I sat by the window again. The city lights flickered, and the wind carried the faint sound of laughter from the park. I thought about how strange life was, how love could break you and heal you in the same breath. I looked at my husband's photo on the shelf. "I think I understand now," I whispered. "Home isn't a place. It's the people who carry your love in their hearts, even if they're far away. For the first time in many months, I felt a quiet peace settle inside me. Not because everything was perfect again, but because I had learned that love doesn't vanish. It simply changes its home just like we do. The next morning, Maria knocked on my door. "So how was the big visit?" she asked, smiling. I laughed. "Emotional, but good," she nodded. "See? You're stronger than you think." I thought about that for a moment. Maybe she was right. Strength doesn't always look like standing tall. Sometimes it's sitting alone at a window, forgiving people who never asked to be forgiven. That's the kind of strength I was learning. The quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything. That night I made tea again, 2 cups this time, one for me, one for the memory of my husband. I sat near the window and whispered, "We did it, didn't we? We raised him well. He learned how to love, even if it took him time to see it." I smiled to myself, feeling tears of gratitude more than pain. Life had taken a long, winding path, but somehow it had led me back to my heart. And in that stillness, I realized the breaking point I had feared so much wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment I finally began to heal. The days after their visit felt different. The apartment no longer seemed as quiet as before. When I walked around, I could still hear echoes of my grandson's laughter, the soft sound of their footsteps, the clinking of cups on the table. The silence had changed. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt peaceful, like the pause between 2 heartbeats. For a long time, I had been afraid of being alone. I thought loneliness meant emptiness, but now I began to see it differently. Being alone was not the same as being unloved. It was simply a space where I could listen to myself again. I started waking up early. Just as I used to, I'd make tea, open the window, and let the morning breeze fill the room. The world outside was quiet but alive. Children running to school, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery nearby, the sound of birds arguing over crumbs. I found comfort in these small, ordinary things. They reminded me that life still had rhythm, even if it was slower now. Maria and I began meeting almost every day. Sometimes we walked in the park, sometimes we cooked together. She told me stories about her late husband, about the little things he did that made her smile. We laughed, we cried, and most importantly, we listened to each other. It felt good to be seen, not as someone's mother or mother-in-law, but simply as myself. One afternoon, she said, "You should join the community center nearby. They have art classes and reading groups. It'll keep you busy." I laughed. "I've never painted in my life." She shrugged. "Then it's time you learn." The next week, I went with her. I remember standing in front of a blank canvas, unsure where to start. The teacher handed me a brush and said, "Just paint what you feel." So I did. At first, it was messy, just colors without shape. But as the brush moved, I felt something release inside me. It was like my heart had found a new language. I didn't paint perfectly, but I painted honestly. Each stroke carried a piece of the life I had lived. The love, the pain, the forgiveness, the quiet courage. When I finished, I stood back and smiled. It looked like sunrise breaking through clouds. That was the day I realized healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning how to hold both the hurt and the hope in the same hands. Weeks turned into months. The apartment started to feel like home, not the home I lost, but a new one I had built for myself. I decorated it with small things that made me smile: a vase of daisies, a calendar with hand-drawn flowers, a few framed photos of my family. Every item told a story. Every corner carried warmth. Sometimes my son called me in the evenings. He'd say, "Mom, how's everything?" And I'd answer truthfully, "Peaceful, Beta, I'm okay." He sounded relieved each time, but I could hear the guilt still lingering in his voice. So I'd add, "Don't worry, I'm happy you and Sarah are doing well. That's all I ever wanted." He'd pause and then say softly, "We love you, Mom." Those words, once rare, had become more frequent. Maybe distance had taught us both how to love better, not with closeness, but with understanding. My daughter-in-law also started calling sometimes. At first, it was about small things, a recipe, advice about my grandson's school project. But soon, the calls became longer, warmer. One evening, she said, "Mom, thank you for being patient with me. I didn't know how hard it must have been for you." I smiled at the phone. We were both learning. Dear, it just took time. We didn't need to say more than that. Sometimes forgiveness is quiet, not in words, but in the way hearts soften again. One Saturday, they visited me again. This time it felt different. There was no guilt, no awkwardness, only warmth. My grandson ran straight to the small shelf where I kept my paintings. "Grandma, did you make all these?" he asked, eyes wide. I nodded. "Yes, I did." He stared at the bright colors and pointed at one. "This one looks happy." I smiled. "That one's about finding light after rain." He hugged me tight. "You're the best painter, Grandma." I laughed. "Maybe not the best, but definitely the happiest. Later, as we all sat together, my son said, "Mom, you look peaceful. I can see it in your face." I replied, "Because I stopped wishing for what was and started loving what is." He nodded slowly, as if finally understanding something he hadn't before. After they left that evening, I sat alone for a while, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt like the quiet after a good song, the kind that lingers gently in your heart. I made a cup of tea and thought about everything that had happened, the pain, the distance, the tears, the slow rebuilding of love. And I realized something I had never said out loud before. Every ending gives birth to a new beginning, even when you don't recognize it right away. I thought about my husband and whispered, "You were right. Love doesn't end, it just changes homes." I could almost feel his smile in that stillness, the way he used to smile when I finally understood one of his lessons. That night, I wrote a small note and placed it on my bedside table. It said, "Forgiveness is not forgetting what happened. It's remembering without pain." I wanted to keep that reminder close for all the days when life felt uncertain again. Before sleeping, I looked around my little apartment. It was quiet, warm, and filled with pieces of my new life, and I felt a deep, peaceful gratitude, not for the way things turned out, but for the strength I found in learning to let go. In the end, I didn't lose a home. I found one inside myself. One that couldn't be taken away, no matter where I lived or who stayed beside me. Because home, I finally realized, isn't the walls around you, it's the love you carry within your heart, even when the world outside changes. It has been almost a year since I left that house. Sometimes, when I think about it, it feels like a lifetime ago. Other times, it feels like yesterday. So much has changed since then. The Achy that used to live in my chest has quieted down. It still visits sometimes, like an old friend who drops by without warning, but it doesn't stay long anymore. Now, I greet it kindly and let it go. I have learned to fill my days with small joys. I tend to my plants in the morning, walk in the park, and feed the stray cats that gather near the bench. Maria and I still share coffee every other day, talking about our families, our memories, and the little things that make life gentle again. Some evenings, I sit by my window and paint. The colors no longer come from sadness, they come from peace. When I hold the brush, I feel steady, whole, like I'm stitching together all the pieces of my heart one color at a time. I never thought I'd be this calm again. For a long time, I believed that when your home breaks, something inside you breaks forever. But now I know that sometimes the cracks just let more light in. My son calls every week. He tells me about work, about his son's new hobbies, about how life keeps moving faster than he expects. I listen smiling and tell him to slow down, to breathe, to take care of his heart. He laughs and says, "You sound happier than me, Mom," and maybe I am, because peace, once you find it, doesn't depend on where you are. It depends on how gently you hold the world inside you. My daughter-in-law sends me pictures sometimes. Her messages are warmer now. She writes, "Mom, I made your soup recipe," or "I finally tried your way of folding bed sheets." It makes me smile. We both had to grow to understand each other. And growth, I've learned, often comes dressed as pain. My grandson visits every few weeks. He runs into my apartment like it's still his favorite place in the world. He sits by my painting table and asks 100 questions. "Grandma, why is the sky pink in your picture?" "Because that's how it looked in my heart." I tell him. He laughs and says, "You're funny." I look at him and think, if love had a shape, it would look like this small boy's smile. When he leaves, I always stand by the door, watching him go. It doesn't make me sad anymore. It just reminds me that love doesn't end when someone walks away. It stays in memories and lessons, in quiet moments that never fade. Sometimes at night I sit alone and talk to my husband again. I tell him everything, how our son has become kind, how our daughter-in-law is learning tenderness, how our grandson makes me laugh. I tell him about Maria, about the coffee, the art, the sunlight on the park benches. I tell him I'm okay, because I am, and in the stillness of those nights, I imagine his voice saying, "You did well, you kept love alive, even when it hurt." That's all I ever wanted. Not perfection, not control, just the courage to keep love alive. There's a quote I once read, that sometimes people leave not because they stop loving you, but because their love needs a new place to grow. I think about that often. Maybe my leaving gave my son's family the space they needed to grow stronger. And maybe it gave me the silence I needed to hear my own heart again. It's strange how life arranges things in ways we can't understand until much later. Back then, I thought I was being pushed away. Now I see that I was being guided toward a version of myself I had forgotten, one who could still laugh, still forgive, still begin again. If there's one thing this journey has taught me, it's that love doesn't always stay under one roof. Sometimes it spreads across homes, across generations. Across the quiet spaces where people remember each other kindly, you don't lose it, you just learn to carry it differently. I used to believe that when someone says, "This isn't your home anymore," it means you no longer belong. But now I know better. Home isn't a place someone gives you or takes away. Home is the warmth you leave behind in others and the peace you build inside yourself. And if you have that, even a small corner of your heart that stays gentle, then you're never truly homeless. You're simply on your way back to yourself. So if anyone ever tells you to leave, don't carry bitterness with you. Carry love, even the quiet kind, because love is the only thing that makes leaving bearable and returning possible. And one day, when you sit by a window somewhere new, with a cup of tea, a memory, and a steady heart, you'll realize you never really lost anything. You just found a new way to keep love alive. That is how my story ends, not with anger, not with regret, but with peace, because sometimes the greatest gift life gives us is the chance to begin again, and to do it with love still in our hearts.